Hello, everyone, and welcome to FaM Sports Varsity. I'm your host, Frank Langella, joined by my co-host, Marcilio Langella. Mars, this is our third team previews show. We've done Section 1AA, we've done Section 1A, and this show is for Section 1B. And although not as big as the previous two videos, as in size big, this could be probably the most competitive class in Section 1 from top to bottom. Each week, a different team can come out the winner. And that just shows you that there might not be 20 teams or something like that, but I tell you what, there's 8 teams, and they're all competitive, and there's a bunch of nice little rivalries going on in this section.
Yeah, I mean, 8 teams is going to be in my opinion, like a smaller gauntlet because most likely you're going to have to take away the top 4 teams for the playoff system, and
if there is one,
if there is a playoff system. So it's as long as you meet that top half criteria, then you make it. So, and there's a lot of talented players in this class, and these teams are really not that far off in talent. So it's really going to be a showdown to see who's the most well coached and who has the least amount of injuries and who has the most veterans, really, in my opinion.
And then we want to welcome our fans. We appreciate you guys coming into the show. You guys can follow us on Twitter. On the banner, obviously, you can see where we are on Twitter. You can follow us on Instagram. And obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, give us a like, share the video, subscribe. We're going to continue to put out content throughout the season. But Mars, there's not going to be as long of a show because there's only 8 teams, but now we can dive a little bit more into each program, which is nice. And so, let's get into it right away. In 2019, the last time we played, Ardsley was the champion. They beat Byram Hills in the 1B title. But B also went through some changes, right? So Albertus Magnus has gone to the Independent League. Bronxville has moved down to Class C. And Hen Hud has moved from A to B. So they had a bigger school. So this is definitely going to be an interesting dynamic. And like you mentioned, the talent, there's not a huge discrepancies in talent. It's going to find out who, when the coaches implement their schemes, who does it the best, who's most technically sound. Injuries are going to play an important role. This is going to be a very interesting class. And Mars, let's dive into it. What we'll do is, and, full disclaimer, we've spoken to a bunch of the coaches here in B, not all of them. And when we talk about projected starters, Mars, we've talked about this on the previous videos. It doesn't mean, these are the starters that have been locked in. Practice doesn't start till the 8th, right? A lot can change, especially in those 2 weeks of practice. Just because we don't bring up your name, that doesn't mean coach doesn't think highly of you or we don't think you're a good player. But this is just based on what we saw on tape. This is based on the conversations that we've had. And again, if we don't mention your name, this should be something that motivates you to put your stamp when that March 8th start date comes around.
Yeah, I mean, I said this before. I mean, at the end of the day, you should be driving yourself to be better every day, right? Especially when it comes to practice and for every game. And as a coaching mentality, you always tell every single player that if you push hard in practice and you show that you're progressing, then the coach is going to notice it right away and give you a chance. I mean, the biggest thing, even when we coach, is about loyalty and respect, right? It's as long as you give everything you have every day, respect for not just us, but respect for yourself as a player. That's like the big thing I want to get across. And as long as you put the work in every single day and you train, you bust your butt, then we'll notice, right? Yeah. We'll notice that you are trying your hardest. Absolutely. And we'll give you a chance. And I think almost every coach has that mentality. Yeah. So that's my message.
Absolutely.
To the players.
And to that point, a lot of coaches have different philosophies, but there's one thing that generally goes around in all the coaches, and that's if you put in the work, if you put in a lot of effort, right, that's who they'll give an opportunity to. Right? Those are the ones that they kind of draw to, even if mistakes are made, because they believe if you put in the work, those mistakes will be corrected.
Yeah.
So if you bring those, right, that will give you the opportunity. Now, when you get that opportunity, will you take advantage of it? Right? That's what's going to be the big question. And so, that's a great message to all the kids. Coaches have a loyalty to hard work, right? And hard work and a good mindset, right? Being humble, being, passionate, being aggressive on your job, helping your team, being a good teammate. Those are things that what coaches are loyal to. So, Mars, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the first two programs, which were the teams in 2019 championship. And then after that, it was going to be randomized, right? Again, the order is not based on how talented we think the team is. But we do want to start with the two teams that played in the last championship. And let's start with the actual champion, Ardsley, Mars. Coached by Dan DeFalco. He's been there since 2016. And Mars, since his time there in 2016, Ardsley has really, they've had a good program, but they've really taken off. They're 29-10 since he's been there. And in 2019, they went 9-1. They beat Byram Hills in that 1B championship, like I mentioned. Back-to-back championships, right? That's quite an accomplishment. And they've been 500 or above for 8 straight years now for Ardsley, right? So they really stamped themselves as one of the most prominent programs in this class. But they lost a lot of talent, right? They were a very talented championship team over the last 2 years, and they lost a lot of talent. Offensively, they're only projected to bring about 4 of the 11 starters. They lost guys like Osborne, George Liberis, FaM, their quarterback Martini. So they're going to have to replace a bunch of starters. On the offensive line, they do bring back 2 of the 5 starters, which definitely helps. Defensively, they bring back about 5 of the 11. I think the biggest strength is going to be in the front 7. Okay, because they bring back 2 of their 3 linebackers and 3 of their 4 defensive linemen. So that is definitely going to help. Problem is, all new secondary, right? So we're going to see some of the new names, how they're going to fill in that back end. But when I spoke to Coach, and offensively, he talked about keeping the offense the same as what they've done in previous year. Have a base offense. They like to go fast. They like to have good tempo. They don't want to control the tempo. And that worked a lot for them last year. But again, finding that quarterback, finding that new bell cow running back, because Osborne, who is, he's actually going to Louisville now to run track. Right? That just shows you how an explosive football player they had. But they had talent all over the place. Defensively, they were the number 1 defense in B last year. Okay? And they really take pride in the defense at Ardsley. That's the anchor for the team. They take pride in it. They like to change fronts. They like to have strong communication. And they're looking to duplicate that. They want defense to be a stalwart at Ardsley. And they want to win. Obviously, that's the goal, to win the championship if there is one, to win the league if there is one. And, the biggest question mark Coach has is how do you get, we talk about March 8th as a start date. They only give you about 2 weeks until games start. Right? So how do you get into game speed in those 2 weeks? That's going to be the biggest question. That's what Coach DeFalco talked about as the biggest question for this team. And going into the players, Mars, we have to start with the guys coming back from that championship. And I want to start with the offensive lineman and defensive lineman, Kyle Matson. He was a Frank's finest. He's really an anchor on both sides of the ball. He's a wrestler on the offensive side. Again, a good drive blocker, a guy who can move bodies. You could tell he's a strong kid. Not tall, but a real strong base. He uses that base well. And defensively, he's going to be an important 2-way player. He played some defense at the defensive end spot. I'm interested to see if he stays at the defensive end spot. But he was a very solid, productive football player, and he's, with the increased role, is going to have to be an anchor on both sides of the ball. But I got to talk about one of our favorite guys, Mars, and another Frank's finest, Ryan Watson, the junior, right? He was tight end, wide receiver, outside linebacker. He was Frank's finest, young football player last year, and on a team with a bunch of talent to really make plays in all 3 phases of the game. What he did offensively, defensively, and special teams as a sophomore on a championship team is not easy to do. It's not easy to stand out, and this kid stood out. Offensively, I think he's one of the more well-rounded tight ends in the class. He can block. He can go out for patterns. He can be out for patterns out wide as an X or a Z. He can be inland as a tight end. Right, so he brings that versatility that he can line up in multiple spots. Mm-hmm. He's got solid speed, solid hands, solid route runner. This kid's just solid, and I think he is the potential for the breakout player for this team this year. And defensively, I really liked his athleticism. He could drop into coverage. He made some nice plays on the ball. This is a well-rounded football player, and coming in as a junior, I'm expecting big things from him in this season. Mars, moving on to another kid that impressed me, James LeBaris. I talked about I think it's his brother, George. I don't know if they had the same last name. But James LeBaris is a linebacker and running back. This kid, another Frank's finest, is a real thumper at the linebacker spot. Does a really good job attacking downhill. And he brings that downhill mentality at the linebacker spot to the running back spot. He might be that next bell cow running back, and he's going to have to be, I don't know if he takes the same load that Osborne had, but he's going to take a similar role, and he's going to be that power runner, and I'm interested to see what goes on there. Another guy that impressed me, Mars, their kicker, Darren Judge. And he was our Frank's finest kicker. Coach talked about he's going to be playing some offensive line, defensive end. I love that. Look at that. Kicker playing on the O-line and defensive side. All three phases of the game. I love it. This kid had over 90% on his PATs. He kicked a few field goals as well. This kid is a very talented kicker. And then some of the names that we didn't hear that are newcomers, right? Connor Jones is one of them, right? Wide receiver and defensive back. This kid, JV kid, two-way player on the JV. Ardsley does a really good job in the JV program, and they've kind of built them up for that continued success that we talked about. Another guy, Christian Dash. He was on the varsity. He played towards the end of last year. I thought he made some solid plays defensively and on special teams, but this kid, 5'11", 220 pounds, not tall, but good size, good thickness. And again, junior, so we're going to see his role increase, what he does with that. Another guy, George Costas. Another, not tall, 5'9", but 230, Mars. He played center. He played defensive tackle last year. Strong kid, does a good job on the offensive line, turning people's bodies. Is going to be another important. They're really going to make or break with this offensive and defensive line, in my opinion, for this team. And then those other weapons kind of coming together. But the final big question is going to be quarterback, Mars. And Coach talked about there's a battle at quarterback. A couple names to keep in mind. Michael Malarge, the junior, smart kid, good arm, and another kid, Matt Levy, quarterback and defensive back, battling for that QB spot. Who is going to take that quarterback role? Who's going to take that leadership role? It's going to be really intriguing to see this Ardsley team, Mars.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of mentioned some really important key things here. Firstly, they lost a lot of their big-time starters. And offensively, I think they lost probably the most just because you losing such dynamic players is hard to rebound from. They lost their quarterback. Most of their offensive line is gone. So they really need to kind of focus in on establishing those roles. I think getting the depth is going to be really important in the offensive line. Defensively, the benefit to who's returning is that it's really like your front five, front seven, front five. And I think that's the best case scenario of losing a lot of talent. Is that not saying like secondary doesn't matter or anything, but it's more like the front, having a front seven that's solidified, that's pretty good, allows you to now mix and match secondary players that will fit the mold on whatever your game plan is going to be moving forward. But you kind of mentioned the fact that they need to rely on some of their veteran talent to kind of push them forward. I mean, Kyle Madsen, the offensive line, defensive line, Frank's finest. I mean, James LeBaris, another senior linebacker, running back. Is he going to take the same type of load as Osborne did? And Darren Judge being somebody that is not only just a kicker, but being an athlete, being somebody that the team can rely on more than one facet. And then it's going to be about your young studs, right? Yeah. How much does your young talent push your team forward? And we already know Ryan Watson is going to be somebody that is going to take a heavy load for this team because he is a very talented football player. I mean, we can't just. I mean, we gushed over him on the Frank's Finest show, but it's really going to be on the rest of the young talent like Connor Jones, Christian Dash, George Costas. Can these guys push the players forward? And then lastly, as you mentioned, the quarterback, right? Who is the quarterback going forward? Between these two guys, who's going to establish themselves as being the top, the most efficient and most reliable quarterback between the two? And that's good. That's going to be a question not only just for the start of the season, but as they go forward. I mean, that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that just because you start the season as quarterback doesn't mean like, oh, you're staying the starter.
No,
you have
to
changes. You have to play consistently well, and especially in an offense that lost a lot of its key players, the quarterback position is going to be really important.
And I talked about a lot of juniors. This is not going to be a senior-heavy team. This is going to be a young football team that we talked about in numerous shows. Probably gets better as the season goes along. Right, so you could see it being a little bit rough in the beginning with a new quarterback, a bunch of juniors out there. But definitely with this coaching staff, you could definitely see them improve as the season goes along. It's going to be a tough to three-peat with a young football team. But Ardsley's up for the task. That's what they want to do. Let's go to the team they played in 2019, Mars. Byram Hills, and they're coached by Coach Doug Carpenter. He's been there since 2016 as well. And in 2019, they went 7-2. They lost to Ardsley in the championship like we talked about. But 2019, Mars, was a pretty significant season. It was their most wins since 2008 when they also had 7 wins. They haven't had back-to-back winning seasons since 2013, 2014. I have a good feeling, Mars, that they might hit that milestone this year. And just looking at the starters coming back, they're projected to bring back 7 of the 11 starters on offense, but they do have to replace their quarterback. Good news, offensive line-wise. They bring back 3 of their 5 offensive linemen. They did lose 2 good offensive linemen, so it's not completely great, but they do bring back 3 of the 5. And defensively, bringing back 9 of the 11 starters, Mars, is huge. And when I spoke to Coach, offensively, he talked about it. With the shortened time, you're going to see a shortened playbook. They want to be fundamentally sound, okay? And they want to find out what the kids are comfortable with. And so Coach did go give us a little bit of nugget. He's expecting to see a little more 12 personnel, right? Bringing a couple of tight ends. So I'm interested to see how that dynamic works. Defensively, they want to stop the run, right? They want smart defenders. Coach puts a lot on their plate defensively. He gives them a lot of different concepts to handle. But he wants smart football players. And I, coming from a defensive background, we like to have fun defensively. So we do make things, I'm not going to call it complicated, but more in depth. And so Coach has a similar mindset. He puts a lot on them academically. He made no mistake about it, but he thinks having smart defenders can make them a better defense, and he wants to duplicate that. And the goal, again, similar. You're going to start seeing all these coaches, because they're all competitive, he wants to win 1B, right? Yep. So it's similar to the other coach. They want to win. If there's a championship, they want to win it. If there's a league, they want to win it. And the biggest question is game day operations when I spoke to Coach. And it was an interesting, game day operations. Usually you have to practice that kind of stuff. Where do you find the practice time? And where do you get the game rhythm, not just with the kids, but with your own staff, right? You got to go through meetings with your staff. You have to kind of run through the motions with how things run on game day and stuff like that. So it was an interesting comment and definitely something to keep in mind. But when I look at the players, Mars, this team had the most Frank's finest out of this class, and for good reason. And let's start with the running back and linebacker, Matt Wheeler. He was Frank's finest at the running back spot. A really well-rounded running back. He can run with power. He can run with speed. He does a good job in the zone concepts when they go into the spread looks. I think the only thing holding this kid back is health, right? Because he did get banged up last couple of years now. Because this kid has a bunch of tools, and he could be one of the best backs in the class. And there's no mistake about it. It's just health is going to be the only thing that stops this kid. So if he's healthy, I'm expecting to be a dynamic football player for this team. Another kid we both love, Steven Franco. I call him athlete because he lines up everywhere. He lines up as a tight end. He lines up at wide receiver. Lines up at quarterback when they do power read and run concepts. They even talked about, I spoke with Steven. They might even throw a pass or two. Who knows? But this kid is the most, in my opinion, the most versatile player in Class 1B. He's one of the most dynamic. And he is somebody that every defensive coordinator, when he's on the offensive side of the ball, has to keep track of, because he has that, once he gets to open field, he's gone. And, I just love all the little things that he does. He runs good routes. He makes contested catches. He can block. I mean, he is a good football player. And if he wasn't running track in college, he'd be playing football in college. So I'm not, he's just an absolute stud. But moving on, Mars, let's go to a couple of linemen, which we really like as well. Eli Ratson, Mars, right? The edge defender, offensive lineman, another Frank's finest on both sides of the ball, which is difficult to do. But he deserves it. He's really disruptive on the edge. We spoke about him in the Frank's finest. Run or pass. Very disruptive. He's one of the better pass rushers. An offensive lineman, a tough, nasty guard who wants to punish you. And he has good feet. Not the biggest guy, but good feet, shows good strength. Another guy on the offensive line, Mars, Julian Carnevale, athletic tackle. He was a Frank's finest. A guy has a real nasty streak to him. Does a good job moving his feet. I'm interested to see the role that he plays on both sides of the ball this year. Ryan Abit-Marco, another Frank's finest at the linebacker spot. I really like this kid's ability to read offenses, attack the line of scrimmage with no wasted steps. He shows solid range, solid athleticism, shows the ability that he can go into coverage. This kid is an old school linebacker, not the tallest guy, but he wins with technique. He wins with awareness. I really like this kid at the linebacker spot. But somebody to talk about that is going to be huge. I mentioned the quarterback not being coming back. So they got to replace the quarterback, Mars. And Hayden Fooling is the front runner for it. This kid, the senior, he was a darn good defensive back last year. So he played defensive back. He was a backup quarterback. He is going to be the guy who takes this mantle. He's the front runner for the quarterback spot, and he is a hard worker. Now, I watched, talk to Coach about him. I've watched his tape. I watched his offseason workouts. This kid is a hard worker. I really liked his ability as a defensive back to stop the run, to drop into zone coverage, even play some man. Now, does he play both ways? Does he take the quarterback spot and stay defensive back? Does he just stay at quarterback? I think this is a good two-way player. This kid at 6'2", 190 pounds, Mars, he's well built, and I know he can run the ball. He can do all the power reads. The biggest question is his ability to throw, his ability to read a defense, and that's going to be the biggest question. But hard work, there he checks that box. Tough football player, he checks off that box, and a solid two-way player. Another guy to keep in mind, Mars, offensive lineman and linebacker, Daniel Ahern. This kid about 6 feet, 215 pounds. He is a really good complement to Ryan, right? Ryan's more that rangy linebacker, sideline to sideline linebacker. Daniel is the thumper, right? He's that Mike linebacker. The guy attacks downhill, stops the run. He's really going to hit you when he squares you up. He also plays guard, all right? So he's one of those returning offensive linemen who's going to be important. They're bringing back both their guards, which is huge. And I'm interested to see, the jump that he makes from his junior and senior year. Another guy, Jack Tillinger, running back and defensive back. When Matt Wheeler went down, everyone was like, this is a huge loss, and it is a huge loss. But Jack Tillinger is one of the, underrated backs in the class, and he stepped in for him, and he played really well. I mean, this kid is another junior going back seeder, steady football player on both sides of the ball. He's a good complement, more of a shifty runner and a speed runner compared to Matt, who has that power. Mm-hmm. But Jack is another solid football player, and they have a good dual-threat quarterback. Finally, I want to talk about the kicker. Obviously, special teams is going to be big, especially with reduced practice time. If you have a kicker who could be a weapon, it's huge, and that's David Gold, right? Going from junior to senior. We talked about the little kicking rivalry between Ardsley and Byram Hills. I'm interested to see that one, Mars. But what are your comments on
Yeah,
Byram Hills?
At the end of the day, you look at Byram Hills and you look at Ardsley. Byram Hills has a big returning advantage, right? A lot of their players are returning 7 out of the 11 offensively, 9 out of 11 defensively, and one thing I really like is the offensive line 3 out of 5. And usually when you see that, it means that their offensive line is going to be pretty solid. Just because you're not having to teach new players these schemes or anything, and you have a nice rhythm and nice consistency with your offensive line. Synergy is probably the best word for it. But not only is their offensive line crucial, but they just have so many solid skill players that I really like a lot. But let's first talk about the Frank's finest. I mean, Matt Wheeler is a very good football player, very good running back, linebacker. But at the end of the day, I hope he stays healthy, right? And that's like his biggest thing you're looking for him in this season. Is that if he does stay healthy, he will have a good season for sure. Then you have Steven Franco, who we regard as probably being the best athlete in the class for sure. And this kid can do everything, and I like him a lot. And I really think he is a weapon that you really have to key off on. And then we get to the other, the front guys, the offensive line. Eli Ratson and Julian Carnival are two guys that are really going to contribute on your offensive line, and also especially defensively as well, because all these guys I just mentioned were two-way players. And then lastly, Ryan Abemarco is a thumper, right? He is a thumper and linebacker. Thumper guy. Yeah, and having the fact that you're not only returning all their offensive linemen, but your two inside linebackers is going to be really important. I mean, at the end of the day, like just think about this. Daniel Ahern, I think I'm saying this correctly. Having a nice a two linebacker set where one is the thumper, one is more of the rangy guy that kind of not compensates, but complements the other linebacker next to him. And I think that's a very deadly combination, especially when you have all these other talented players all across the board. I mean, you're going to have a front crew guys that are going to be good.
You're bringing back some D linemen. You're bringing back your linebackers. You're bringing back some secondary guys. Like this is. They're bringing back a lot of vets that were on last year's team that went to a championship.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
2019's team.
Yeah, and that's the point. I think the fact is when Coach is saying he wants to win the championship, that's not a goal that's far off, right? It's a goal that meets expectation because of all these players returning. And I mean, I can talk all day about about all the players themselves and how many they're bringing back. But the bottom line is when you look at this list of players, you can understand why Coach made that goal in the beginning of the season. And lastly, David Gold, kicking battle.
Special teams.
It's going to be interesting for sure.
Absolutely. And I'll just say this. I think talent-wise, if I had to choose one team that I believe has the most talent returning, if you forced me to, I think Byram Hills probably is the most talented team in B, but that doesn't always mean you win a championship. That doesn't always mean you go undefeated having the most talent, right? But just pure talent wise, I think Byram Hills might be the most talented team. Let's move to the next team, Mars. Let's go to Pearl River, and that's coached by Mike Oliva. Coach Oliva's been there since 2014. Last year in 2019, they made their move to to B, excuse me, and they had a very successful year. They went 6-4. They lost to Byram Hills in the playoffs. They had back-to-back winning seasons for the first time since 2010 and 2011. They haven't had 3 straight winning years, Mars, since before 2004. So I feel like this is another year where this program can hit a milestone. And, they're going to bring back some talent offensively. 5 of the 11 starters. They do have to replace their quarterback, but in the offensive line, 3 of the 5 offensive linemen returning is big. Right? Defensively, 6 of the 11 were starters returning. And, they were the 5th-ranked defense. So bringing back 6 of the 11 is going to be is another big boost for the team. And when I spoke to Coach, they're moving a little bit more into the spread. They were a heavy wing tee, but now they're going to do some spread mixed with some wing tee stuff. They're going to be in some gun. They're going to do some RPOs. And like I mentioned, you can't take wing tee completely out of a wing tee coach, right? So you're going to see some wing tee out there. Defensively, they take pride in gap control defense. They don't like to blitz a lot, but they want to take away your top option. So that's kind of, they like to let the kids play, right? They're not going to bring a ton of pressure, but they're looking for those guys up front to create pressure, and they're looking for the defense to be well sound in where they are on the defense. And again, similar goals, right? They want to win the Class B championship, if there is one. Right, so you're going to hear that quite often. But Coach mentioned the biggest question mark is young players getting to varsity speed. And that's a really underrated issue, right? When we talked about young players, it's a big jump from JV to varsity, right? It's a huge jump. So if you're on the JV and you go to varsity, the speed is something you have to get accustomed to. And if you didn't play and now you're playing this year, you still have to get that speed accustomed to. There's practice speed and then there's game speed, right? If practice speed's overwhelming you, can you imagine what game speed is going to? You have to get used to that. So that's important. But when I look at the players coming back, Mars, I think the best news is when Coach told me that Liam Fitzpatrick is going to come out for the football team. He was a Frank's finest. I know it was 50-50 whether he was going to play football, but Coach says that he is going to play. Running back and edge defender, Mars. I think he's one of their more active defensive players, but he was a Frank's finest at the running back spot because as the season went along, he became more and more vital to that offense. And this is just a downhill runner. He's not going to, he's not the fastest guy, right? But I tell you what, he hits the hole hard. He gets that 4 or 5 yards each time, especially by the goal line. He's really tough to stop. And he's one heck of a blocker at the running back spot, too. So, he lines up at that fullback spot. And just to see what they do with him this year. But this kid is a well-rounded two-way football player, and it's huge news for this team for him to come back. Another kid to keep in mind, Mars, another Frank's finest, Hudson Cheristol, right? Defensive end, the edge, defender, whatever you want to call him, and tight end. This kid is an athletic freak. He was a Frank's finest. We talked about him a bunch on the show. And, this kid just spews talent. You could tell that he can make a bunch of plays. He's got good length. He's got good speed when he's rushing the passer. The only question is strength, and he could build that up. And I'm interested to see if he did to stop run plays that are right at him. Right, so sometimes he uses speed and length, but what is he going to do when it comes down to you have to outmuscle somebody? I think he has that potential. Right, so we'll see. But he was one of Frank's finest. I'm also interested to see him on offense at the tight end spot. Does his role increase on the offense? So that's going to be interesting to me. Another Frank's finest, Mars, on the offensive line, Adrian Hassaj, the senior O-lineman and D-lineman. This kid, a big football player, 6'3", 250 pounds. We mentioned he was playing hurt last year, but still grinded out this season. He's going to have to be the anchor on the offensive line. He's going to have to move bodies, especially when they run that wing T stuff. You need that offensive line who could down block, who could pull, who can kick out. This is going to be an important football player for the team on both sides of the ball. A couple of names that, we didn't talk about at Frank's finest, but guys to keep in mind. Jack Responti, the junior, and I think this kid could be the breakout player for this team. He's a defensive end and defensive tackle. Junior, he had his sophomore year in 2019. He's going to be a junior this time around. He's the captain on the field for the defense Coach talked about. This kid's 6'3", 200 pounds, right? Good size, good length, and he has a high motor. I think this kid, I'm really interested to see that sophomore to junior jump, especially the late junior, you want to call it, like a later junior player, because I think this kid could be a breakout football player on the defensive end for them. He is, high motor kid who made a bunch of plays. I'm interested to see his growth. Another kid to keep in mind, Mars, linebacker and offensive lineman, John Sullivan. This kid's about 6 feet, 180 pounds, but he plays bigger than he is. He's just a tough two-way football player. He's going to be another important player on the offensive line coming back, especially at the linebacker spot where you're going to have to make a bunch of tackles because they have talent up front, right? They have talent defensive tackle, DN. He'll get some opportunities because a lot of the offenses are going to have to focus on stopping those guys in the front four. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to see that. Another kid to keep in mind as an offensive weapon, wide receiver and safety, Anthony Sassano. This kid, 6'2", 180 pounds, really good size kid. He's going to be a big target at the defensive spot at the safety. I thought he was a pretty good run-stopping safety. Very active, did show solid range, so I'm interested to see his growth into his senior year as well. Another kid to keep in mind is a weapon, Jack Swools, wide receiver, kid 5'11". Going to have to be important for that whoever they find as the next quarterback, which is going to be interesting. And Nick Carbone, another kid, junior, 5'7", 170 pounds. Not the biggest kid, but again, shifty, athlete. And on defensive line, Christopher Burke. All right, so adding to that arsenal on the defensive line, I think that defensive line-wise, I think they'll be pretty, they're going to be pretty formidable on the defensive line. So just another name to keep in mind as kind of that bolstered unit. And the quarterback spot we talk about, and this is going to be my X factor. And Ryan O'Neal, the junior, is the front runner for this job. I'm not saying he's won it, but I think he's the front runner. And they've had their eyes on this prospect, this young man, for a while, since ninth grade. So they've been coaching staff has been very intrigued by this young man. This kid at 6 foot, decent size, obviously could put on some weight, but he has a good mixture of mobility and arm strength, Mars. And to me, this is the X factor of the team because I think they'll be pretty solid up front. I think they'll have a solid running game, like with some of the weapons that I mentioned, with the quarterback play, right? What is a young quarterback going to do? How fast does he come to grips, with the offense? Does he take the mantle? So that's kind of where I am with Pearl River, bringing back quite a few bunch of talent. I think they'll be pretty stout up front on both sides of the ball, and we're going to see what happens at the quarterback spot.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the returning players, that's kind of how I always start out, and because this can kind of give you an idea of how the start of the season is going to be. Yep. When they have a solid amount of returning players, it means that there's less learning that needs to happen. It's more more easy to transition in. And I think that looking at Pearl River, you have 5 out of 11 offensively, 6 out of 11 defensively returning, which is a good sign just to be started with. The offensive line, 3 out of the 5 coming back, which is another good thing to see. The downside is you're losing a quarterback, right?
And losing some skill guys.
And losing some skill guys. So now you kind of have to see who's going to be your next big player. But just like we talked about before, whenever you do lose a good amount of starters, you have to rely on your veteran presence. And I think that's what Pearl River is going to do, especially when you look at guys like Liam Fitzpatrick, Hudson Cheristol, Adrian Hosh, and I think that those guys are going to be really important to kind of establish a consistency going forward and bring leadership along with them, because now it's going to be on them to kind of bring the underclassmen up to the fold. And if they can do that, if the young players can really perform, then this can be a good season for Pearl River. And at the end of the day, as you mentioned, the X factor is going to be Ryan O'Neal, right? Quarterback play. Can the quarterback bring in that consistency and that efficiency that any offense would need? And if they can do that, they do have the skilled players that will allow them to move around on the offensive end. Defensively, being fifth is pretty solid to begin with, and you're bringing back some players. So that means that you can only build on that, right? And it's really going to, like I said, depend on the young players coming in on whether you will either stay at that spot or you can possibly be higher on that list.
And I think quarterback play, when I call it an X factor, is because I think it'll change how this team plays. Coach talks about wanting to go into the spread a little bit more and run RPOs. You can't do that without consistent quarterback play, right? So that might dictate whether they go more heavy into wing T or they go into spread. Mars, let's go to the next team. We'll go to Westlake, and that's coached by John Castellano. He's been there since 2015. Everyone knows Castellano. Anyone who's studied Section 1 football knows a longtime coach at Nanuet. He has 220 career wins. I think he's 3 wins away from breaking the 30th spot in the all-time high school football. So he has an opportunity. The team has an opportunity to give him that milestone. In 2019, they went 5-4. They lost to Ardsley in the semifinals, but they have been above 500 for 6 straight years, and they've made the 1B finals 3 out of the last 5 years. So this, again, you talk about Westlake, you talk about consistency, and you talk about a prominent program in the B class. And they're going to bring back a lot of talent, right? So offensively, they're expecting 9 of the 11 starters, Mars. They do have to replace the quarterback, or their part-time quarterback, because we'll get into the quarterback spot. And offensive line, 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen. Defensively, they also bring back 8 of the 11 starters. So a lot of talent coming back. And when I spoke to Coach, no one mistakes a Castellano coach football team. They are ground and pound, right? But Coach did talk about he wanted to stretch the field more vertically. He wanted to trust his weapons because they will bring back weapons, creating more instant offenses, like we like to call it, those field-changing plays. Mm-hmm. Defensively, they want to be the number 1 defense in B, and that's a nice high milestone, especially when you look at the rest of the talent in B. But when you bring back 11 starters, it's not unusual for him to have that kind of goal. And he thinks the kids have a better understanding of their scheme. So, it's a good goal to have. And, Coach talked about what are the goals he has. He wants to win each week. If there is a B title, he wants to win that. So, yep. You're talking about all these coaches are competing for that B title, and all of them have a chance. But the biggest question is physical contact, Mars. With all the virtual stuff, with all the, social distancing, practices or workouts, whatever you want to call them, football is a contact sport, right? So in those 2-week spans, you're going to have to make contact with people. And then when a game day comes, you're going to have to, be physical. And how do you evaluate that? How do you get the kids prepared for that in that 2-week period? Is not going to be easy. And Coach Castellano talked about that. And that's another interesting point is that, you can have all the virtual stuff. You can have all the 7-on-7 concept stuff. But football is you pushing around another person or you trying to stop somebody from pushing you around. And you can only do that one way, and that's by physically practicing that. But going to the players, Mars, I think it all starts with our quarterback and their safety, Matt Sardo. He was our Frank's finest. I think he is the most explosive player in B. So I talked about, previous players being the most versatile. I think this kid is the most explosive, dynamic football player in B, and that is Matt Sardo. He has the it factor to him. This kid plays lacrosse. He is explosive, and I think he's tough. I think he does a good job of making the first defender miss. I think that transition to quarterback will be seamless. And I understand, we've seen top athletes, and I think that's what they're doing right here. They're taking one of their top athletes, moving to the quarterback spot, and they're a run-heavy team. So I think it's going to be seamless. Now, can he keep them honest throwing the football? That's going to be the question. But I think he's going to have an explosive, dynamic athlete at the quarterback spot. I think I like your chances, right? So I think Matt Sardo, he's going to be the engine of this team, especially offensively, and it's going to be extremely important. But going to an offensive lineman is going to be huge for them. Offensive tackle and defensive lineman, Vincent Bravo. He was another Frank's finest. We talked about him, Marsh. We really like this kid's feet. He also does a really good job of finishing blocks. But Coach talked about this kid does everything you ask, and he got better as the season goes along. And I'm expecting that now for his junior to senior jump to be one of the better offensive linemen in this class. Another kid to keep in mind, defensive lineman, offensive lineman, Stephen Ojeda. He was a Frank's finest on the D-line. Love this kid explosive. I talked about Matt Sardo being explosive offensively. This kid is explosive defensively. He really wins with his start. Not tall, but a versatile D-lineman. I've seen him line up in the 1 technique. I've seen him line up in the 3 technique. I've seen him line up as a defensive end. So this kid brings that versatility to him on defensive line. And whether he's going to be a looping tackle or whether he's going to be what we call an eagle tackle or a slanting tackle, this kid can do multiple things. But I think the breakout player for this year, Mars, on this football team is going to be Joe Piazza, linebacker and fullback. He's probably their most active linebacker coming back. This kid is going to have, he has a really good nose for the football, does a really good job attacking the line of scrimmage. I think he's going to be, in my opinion-wise, the leading tackler for the team if he stays healthy. And I think he's going to be a really dynamic linebacker for them. And on the offensive side, he's going to be a guy who's going to be a downhill running back. He's going to have to get those tough yards, those grinded-out yards, and I think he has that ability. A couple other kids to keep in mind on the offensive and defensive line. Tommy Marto. And, this kid, senior, but his junior year, he showed good feet. And he wins with hands and he wins with a high motor. Now, this kid is a high-effort kid, high-motor kid. Made some plays on both sides of the football. Going to be an important cog for that offensive and defensive line. A couple other names to keep in mind, Mars. Carter Falkenberg, 5'11 kid. pretty darn good basketball player. You can tell he's a really athletic kid. He's going to be on both sides of the ball again at the running back spot, defensive back spot. Another kid I really like, Andrew Linus, the senior. This kid is the shifty running back. So we talk about some downhill running backs. This is the kid you want to get on the edge, on the sweeps, on the counters, because he's really shifty in open field. And at the safety, I thought he showed really good range. This kid had quite a few interceptions, which he did by reading the quarterback, making plays on the ball. He shows good awareness. So that's another kid. And finally, Jimmy Murray at the wide receiver spot, another weapon in the passing game. They're going to have to, I mentioned a bunch of running backs, but someone's going to have to be a reliable target in the passing game for Matt Sardo. And so those are kind of the kids I ran through, Mars. For this team, the biggest question to me is depth. Okay, because if you take their starting 11 can match up on both sides of the ball for any team in this class. Any team. Question to me is going to be depth. And so, I'm interested to see how Coach resolves that. I'm interested to see the players that come ready to play. And I think this is going to be one of the more talented teams in B. And it starts with those starting 11 on both sides of the ball. But Westlake is going to bring back a very talented football team.
Yeah, when you look at Westlake, you see that it's going to be senior heavy, right? I think of all the teams we talked about so far, Westlake has the most returning players, right? 9 out of 11 on offense, 8 out of the 11 on defense. The only other one that was up to that level was Byram Hills, right? And the fact that the offensive line's 4 out of the 5 is coming back too is only going to help them. And you mentioned the quarterback, is not returning, but it was more of a 50-50 split. So
towards the end of the year.
Yeah. So technically, when Matt Sardo walks in as the starting quarterback, most likely, it's not going to be that big of a transition as you mentioned before. And I'll start off the conversation with Matt Sardo. I mean, he is very explosive, Frank's finest for the quarterback position, and he shows it clear as day, right? He, especially in an offense that's running heavily, he really is going to prosper in that type of scheme. Now, not saying he can't throw anything, but I think he is a let's run first type of guy. I mean, clearly by seeing his athleticism, you can do that. But I think Westlake is obviously going to be relying on all their seniors to really push his team forward. But when you look at the other Frank's finest players, Vincent Bravo, very good feet. I like him as an offensive lineman. And Steven Ojeda is another good two-way player that I really like a lot.
Tough kid. Not tall, but tough.
Yeah, tough kid. Yeah. I like him on both sides of the ball. Yeah. And you kind of mentioned Joe Piazza being another key cog on this team, especially at the linebacker position, but also plays fullback too. At the end of the day, I mean, you have all this very large senior presence, and it's going to be. I mean, look, football season. I'm not saying anything like it's going to happen, but not having a lot of depth is a dangerous thing in a football season. But if the Westlake can stay healthy, it will give them an advantage over a lot of teams, and that's something that it's very scary to see when a team has so many returning players. Because a lot of times, and we've been coaching for a long time, when you see a team that has a lot of returning players on it. Usually that team is a contender, right? And that's the big thing I noticed with Westlake is because of all these returning players and a shortened season where you're going to be running, you're going to try to run over everyone. Yeah. It seems like Westlake has an advantage compared to a lot of other teams right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's move on to the next team, Mars. Let's go to Nanuet, and coached by Phil Carbone. And 2019, they went 5-4. They lost to Westlake in the quarters. They've been over 500. You want to talk about consistency? They've been over 500 7 out of the 8 previous seasons. Again, a really consistent football program. A lot of consistency you see in B, but consistent program. But they do have to replace a lot of players. They're going to be a bit on the young side. Starters offensively, they're bringing back 3 of the 11. They have to replace their quarterback and the biggest one on the offensive line, bringing back 1 out of the 5 starters on the offensive line. Defensively, similar. 3 out of the 11 starters on defense. When I spoke to Coach, they run a multiple offense, but their bread and butter is running the football. Anyone who watches Nanuet, that's what they do. They like to shorten the game. They like to control the tempo. Defensively, they struggled a little bit last year. And Coach acknowledged that that's not normal for a Nanuet team. They were 7th out of the 9 teams in defense, giving up points per game. They want to improve on all facets. They want to be back to what they normally are, and that is a top 3 defense in B. So definitely it was a little bit out of the norm for them defensively last year. They're definitely looking to correct it this year. But some players to watch. Let's start with the Frank's finest, Mars. DeAndre Edwards, safety and wide receiver. This kid's 6'4", 6'5", right? Tall, long, rangy safety. But he's also a big target that has really good straight line speed. And this kid is going to be an important weapon on the offensive side for the next quarterback. But defensively, again, a rangy safety. Would like to see him improve a little bit on his tackling because I think he's definitely willing in the running game and he's active in the running game. We're definitely like to see him improve on that. But this kid could be a very well-rounded two-way player. I'm interested to see his jump to his senior year. And another kid I really like, the outside linebacker and running back, Tim Ryan. Frank's finest at the outside linebacker spot. Really good finisher, really good guy on the edge. He can stop those edge runs really well. I think he's very instinctive. He plays with high energy. He's going to be a huge two-way player for this team. So I'm expecting big things from Tim Ryan. A couple of the offensive linemen we talk about, right? And one of them, their offensive lineman and defensive lineman, Andrew Knapp. I really like his nastiness. He has a physicality to him that I really like. But the best aspect that he has is he's a versatile lineman. I've seen him line up at center, seen him line up at guard, seen him make some plays at tackle. Having versatile linemen is huge for an offense, and this kid brings that. Another offensive lineman to keep in mind, Nick Ardsley, right? So we're talking about replacing, 4 offensive linemen. You're going to have. It's not going to be easy, but a kid like Nick Ardsley is another name to keep in mind as a returning presence on the offensive line. But to me, the breakout player for this year, and I'm going to talk about their running back and linebacker, Vinny Nicolucci. Okay, he was hurt last year in 2019. You have to go back and watch his sophomore tape, but this kid was a tough football player as a sophomore. Had some shiftiness to him. Not the tallest guy, not the biggest guy, but he runs hard. And, Coach talked about being a bread and butter, running the football team. You're going to see a lot of Tim Ryan. You're going to see a lot of Vinny Nicolucci. And I think this kid could have a breakout year, especially missing last year. He's probably chomping at the bit, missing most of the time last year to get back out there. A name to keep in mind, and I'm interested to see if he is coming out to play for Nanuet, defensive lineman and offensive lineman, Ike Azima. This kid's 6'1", 270 pounds, big body kid. I don't have much insight on him, but if you watch this kid, you're talking about another big body presence on both the offensive and defensive line for a Nanuet team who's looking for linemen. I mean, this kid could be somebody. He has a strong base. He's a guy who can move the pile, and he's someone who's difficult to get moved off his spot. I'm interested to see, a little bit more about this young man. So, is he coming out to play? Is he, because I know there's been a bit of discussion. Didn't get to speak to Coach about him. But the next big thing for me, Morris, is on the quarterback spot. They have to replace that quarterback. Coach talked about it's a 3-way race. 2 of the names are familiar with me, so I'll mention them right now. Ryan Frondy, the junior. Pat Lanahan, the senior. So this is a real open competition at quarterback. Coach mentioned that, there is not one person ahead of the other. This is a pure open competition. They all have an opportunity. Right? Coach talked about 3 guys being out there. So I'm really interested to see the quarterback spot. And finally, one of the defensive back, outside linebacker type players, he was really outside the box most often. Jeremy Shucker, he's also played tight end. There's going to be another important football player coming back that's got to solidify a defense that wants to be top 3, but they have a lot of people they have to replace from last year. So, again, another important football player, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Interested to see what he does on offense. But Nanuet has a lot of faces to replace. Yep. It's going to be an interesting year for them.
Yeah, I mean, so we go from Westlake, that literally is returning almost everybody on the team, to Nanuet, who lost a lot of players, now has to try to fill in those blanks. And it's going to be tough in the beginning. I mean, the reality is depending on how shrunk the playbook's going to be, we'll definitely say that this will be a young team filling, and not saying young as in like they're all juniors, but saying that this is a inexperienced starting group that will probably get better as the season progresses because they'll get more reps, more experience as the season goes on. But you really need to focus on some of the key cogs that you kind of really mentioned here, where first, DeAndre Edwards is going to be somebody that I guarantee they will rely on heavily. I mean, being a big body guy around 6'4", 6'5", tall dude on the defensive side, he's great, but now he'll be a very important weapon on the offense side as a wide receiver. I really think that's going to be something crucial because there's not a lot of guys that can cover a dude that's 6'4", 6'5" in this class. I mean, that's just crazy. But moving on, we got Tim Ryan as being another Frank's finest player. Very good speed, good finisher, as you mentioned, is able to kind of stop any sort of outside runs to his side. But other than that, you're really going to look at a lot of these players that are going to be dudes that have to show out what they are, right? And I think that's going to be the biggest thing for me. I mean, you kind of mentioned, some of the offensive linemen, Andrew Knapp, Nick Ardsley, and you kind of the biggest one I think I have to look at as well is Vinny Nicolucci, right? And he's going to be a breakout guy, as you mentioned, because of the fact that we really didn't get to see much of him. And I think in my opinion, I wouldn't say breakout player because I want to see what he does. I think he'll be
He's
more. Yeah, he's what I was gonna say. He's more my X factor because if he does play well, it will definitely change the outlook of what the offense can do, right?
Yep.
And I think that's something that's important. And obviously, it's almost like I have two X factors. It's going to be obviously Vinny, but also the quarterback position. Because obviously, every time you have to replace a quarterback, it's going to be a big deal to see who's the one stepping in. Mm-hmm. And if you find a guy that can consistently play well and efficiently do what needs to be done, that means the offense can open up more and you'll be able to do a lot more than you thought you could.
And the play action is going to be big. I mean, Coach talks about being a ground and pound. That quarterback will get opportunities if he takes advantage of it, because teams are going to be looking to stop the run against Nanuet. But Mars, let's move on to the next team, and we'll go to Pleasantville, coached by Tony Becerra. And Coach Becerra has been there a long time, since I think it's 2004 he's been there. And he has 103 career wins. He's 103-50. Right? Pleasantville, being one of the smaller schools in B, has also been one of the most successful schools in B, and that's a credit to him and the coaching staff and obviously the players. Whenever I hear about Pleasantville, I always think of a well-coached, tough-nosed, competitive football team. But in 2019, it wasn't a normal Pleasantville year. Right? They went 3-6. They lost to Pearl River in the quarters. 2019 was their least amount of wins since 2010. So it's been a while. And back then, in 2010, that's when they won 3 years. But before 2019, Mars, they've had 5 or more wins for 7 straight years. So definitely a little blip in the radar from a normal Pleasantville team, but they are also going to bring back some talent. Offensively, they're expecting 5 of the 11 starters back. They're bringing back their quarterback. And the strength of the team, in my opinion, and I think in Coach's opinion as well, the offensive line, they bring back 3 of the 5 starters. Defensively is also going to be a big thing for this team. I think offensive line is a strength, and defense is going to be a strength. They bring back 7 of the 11 starters on defense. And when I spoke to Coach, he talks about adjusting offensively their system to the personnel. He wants to rely on this offensive line. Defensively, 3 words that he wants to describe his defense as: having heart, hustle, and fundamentals. And I think that was an interesting dynamic that Coach talked about. He wants to stop what you do best. He wants to make sure the team has strong communication on the defensive end. Communication is huge. When I spoke to goals, the Coach wants the players to focus on week to week, win what's ahead. And the biggest question mark is, can these kids handle the mental grind of a football season? And it's another interesting, important topic. They're going right from a winter season to fall 2, right? There is no gap. Okay, there is no long string of practice. You're really going right into a 2-week period where you need to get ready to play football, a physically draining contact sport. And that mental grind of going from one season right to the next. Now, there are multiple sport athletes that have done that, right? They've done that, but not in the same scenario, right? They don't, they don't go from basketball to football. They usually go from football to basketball. There's usually some gap, right? There's some you get that little month period depending on how well your football team does. But this is going to be a mental grind. I mean, they're really going right into it, and they're going to have to push through, and it's an important topic. But looking at the players, Mars, and there's no mistake, you have a familiarity, being a part of the Pleasantville program. But the players that I definitely caught my eye, and it starts with Matt May. Running back and defensive back. He was Frank's finest at the running back spot, co-captain of the team. I think he's going to be the lead back for this team, an extremely important football player on both sides of the ball. This kid is a tough runner, shifty. He's not physically overpowering. He's not someone you look at and say, wow, this kid is physically dominant. But I tell you, he runs hard, and I like the way this kid, I think with an increased role, is going to have a breakout year. I don't like calling a Frank's finest to have a breakout as my breakout player because I already expect those type of players to be successful. But I really think that he is going to have behind this offensive line a real opportunity to have a successful year, and I think he'll take advantage of it. Another important, and this is my X factor, is quarterback Mike LaCapria. And he's a junior. He was a sophomore last year, a young football player playing the quarterback spot, the lefty. And I think he showed solid mobility. I think he shows when he's decisive, when he knows where he wants to go with the football. I've seen him make some nice throws with some good touch. Again, when you watch a young quarterback go, sometimes the game moves a little bit fast. Sometimes he takes unnecessary risks. Mm-hmm. So I'm really interested to see his growth to his junior year. And that's why I call him the X factor, because I think if he can elevate, if his play and consistency elevate, I think it definitely will change this offense because I think they'll have a real solid running game. I think they'll have solid linemen in front of them. So I think, there will be a situation for him to be an important cog for this offense. But going into where their strength is, let's talk about the linemen. Right? You being a lineman, Mars, let's talk about linemen because linemen are going to be huge this year for every program. And my favorite guy on this both fronts is Jack Collins, the defensive end and offensive lineman, the senior. He was a Frank's finest on the defensive side. He's going to Holy Cross to play lacrosse, so multi-sport athlete. I think he was their most disruptive defensive player. I like, again, not a kid that just physically overpowers you, but he can win with strength. He can win with speed. He can win with his hands. I think he's got solid awareness. This kid is one of my favorite kids on this team on the defensive side of the ball. But offensive-wise, he's an athletic tackle. We talk about lacrosse. You have to have good feet. You got to be able to move your feet. He does that. And he's got good size. I mean, this kid's about, 6'3", right, 215. Solid size kid. I just think he's a really well-rounded two-way football player. And he's going to have to be one of their best players for them to have a successful year. Mm-hmm. And I think he has the opportunity. Another kid, Dylan Hassaj, offensive lineman, defensive lineman. This kid, 6 feet, right? Not the tallest kid, but he is a wide kid. And he can move people at the point of attack. He has that strength, especially in his lower body. He can move people. And, for a wide guy, he actually doesn't have bad feet, right? So he can move his feet a little bit. Another important offensive lineman is going to be, I'm interested to see his role increase as a defensive lineman. So that's going to be something that's intriguing to me. Another kid, offensive lineman, defensive, Michael Oliveira, senior. Again, offensive line and defensive line is going to have to be the strength of his team. That's another name to keep in mind. Another guy, Mike Gordon, the junior on the offensive line. Naya Pierre, the senior tackle on the offensive line. And finally, Rael Bose. So we mentioned 3 of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. Who fills those other 2 spots, right? That's going to be the biggest question because I think they have some bodies. They have some big bodies. Not the tallest bodies, but there's some thickness to them. I mean, the coach talked about it. I think the average size of the offensive line is about 6 feet 220 or 6 feet 220. So, they have some solid size up front, and they're going to have to rely on that. But looking at the other weapons before we get into the conversation, Mars, another kid to keep in mind, running back and quarterback, Brendan McDermott. He's going to be another weapon for the team. Outside runs. Interested to see what kind of role he takes at the running back spot. Probably a good compliment to Matt May, and he's going to have to be a big role on defense as well. But another kid to keep in mind, okay, Jude Sophia. Wide receiver, tight end, but also played on the defensive line. Played a D tackle, defensive end. Moved around a bit. I like his versatility. This kid's got good size. 6'4", 215 pounds. At the tight end spot, he showed the ability to block. He showed the ability he can go out for some patterns. He's kind of like an engine, so he needs to rev up to make some explosive plays. But he was a reliable target for them. And I'm interested to see his growth into a senior because the talent, the raw talent is there. The biggest thing to me is consistency. Right? If he can play consistently, especially on both sides of the ball, this kid is another kid. If I had 2 X factors, he's my second X factor. I went with the quarterback for my first one, but if I had to choose a second X factor, this is the kid because I think the talent is really there. To me, it's just about consistency. Mars, what do you think about Pleasantville?
Well, Pleasantville has a solid amount of returning players. I mean, they did lose some seniors for sure, but I really like who they have that's coming in to fill in these gaps. And it all starts with the offensive line. I really like the size and quick movements of these dudes. And, being a part of the program allows me to kind of see these guys up close. And I can tell you for sure that the offensive line is definitely probably one of the biggest strengths. But there's a lot of skill guys, too, that will definitely have a good season for sure. I mean, Matt May is one of the guys that is a key player on this team, and I've seen him up close, and he can move, right? He has the agility, he has the awareness, and he can really make cuts pretty effectively. And as you mentioned, Mike LaCapria is going to be an X factor because he was a young player last year, and that's a hard thing to do. Walk in as a sophomore and start and throw as best as humanly possible at the quarterback spot with a class that's very competitive, and depending on how much he grows as a quarterback, is really going to kind of show how much the team is going to grow in general. But there's some other players on this group. I mean, Jack Collins, you already mentioned, he is definitely a player that will contribute both on the offensive side and defensive side. But just looking at the other players, like the other skill players, McDermott, I really like him as an athlete. He kind of moves around all over the place, and I think that's something that's crucial in this type of league. You need to have those type of athletes,
Versatile players.
Yeah, versatile players. And Jude Safaya, I mean, he is an athlete for sure because he plays a bunch of different sports, and I think that having a guy that can do multiple different things, especially at his spot, being a tight end, being a wide receiver, being a defensive end, it really does add a lot to a team that is trying to find those guys to fill in those missing pieces. But the returning players are really solid dudes, and I'm looking forward to see how they progress as the season goes on.
Absolutely. And let's move to the next team, Mars, and let's go to Hen Hud, coached by John Catano, where 2019 was his first year back coaching Hen Hud, And in 2019, they went 4-5. This is a team that was in A, now moved down to B. And, this is another program that was consistent in A. I mean, they had 4 or more wins for 5 straight years, Mars, including 11 out of the last 16 years. Right, so this is not a team that, to be taken lightly at all. And moving now to B, where they are I think they are the biggest school in B now. It's just bringing another team to the dance and makes this gauntlet a little more interesting. But again, being 4-5, it broke their 3 straight years of being above 500. So they're definitely looking to get back on track of being over 500 offensively. Now, I didn't get to speak to Coach Catano, but just looking at the roster, looking at the tape, it looks like projectedly they're about to bring back 5 of the 11 starters. They have to replace their quarterback. But the offensive line, 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen coming back is going to be a big boost for them. Defensively, they're going to bring back quite a few starters, 7 of the 11 projected starters. But what are they going to rely on? They have experience on the offensive line. They have experience running the football. And starting at that, according to the Frank's Finest, cornerback and running back Ryan Travis, the senior. He was a Frank's Finest as a DB. I think he's one of the most well-rounded defensive backs in this class in the run, in man-to-man coverage, in zone coverage. I really like this kid on the defensive side. But he's also one of their speedier running backs. So, not easy to tackle in open space. He's going to be an important piece on the offensive side of the ball for him. A really important two-way player, and I'm expecting him to have a big year. Another kid to keep in mind, Chance Artope, Hope I said his name right. I apologize if I have not. But running back and linebacker, this kid, good size, 5'11", 200 pounds, right? Not the tallest, but he's a thick guy. At the linebacker spot, Mars, he's a real downhill guy, and he attacks the line of scrimmage. He's also going to be probably relied on the offensive side of the ball, too, to be that downhill power runner. So another important cog, two-way player, going to have a big year. But another Frank's Finest, Mars, cornerback and running back, Nick Sapita. This kid, Frank's Finest corner, I think he's a real ball hawk. I think he's a really solid guy. He likes to play off coverage so he can read the routes in front of him, and he makes breaks on the ball. Once he picks the ball off, this kid's got some serious speed. He can score on the defensive end, and I'm interested to see how they use him on the edge. I mean, this kid definitely not the biggest guy, but can you run outside runs with him, sweep runs, jet sweeps? Because this kid is a speedy guy, and he's that game-breaking type play that you get him in open field, he can make a lot of things happen. But I really like him as a defensive back. Going to be another guy that talk about experience running the ball. He's going to be a guy that's going to be relied on the offensive side. To me, the biggest X factor for this team is the quarterback spot, and I think the lead man for that is a guy like Matt Zoller, and this kid, 5'10", 5'11", so not the tallest guy, but 180 pounds. And when you go and click on his tape, he didn't play much last year from what I saw. This kid has really nice mobility. I think he has a really nice quick release. I think this kid is going to become a household name in this class of quarterbacks. I think this kid's going to impress him, and that's why I have him as an X factor, because I didn't get to see as much as I wanted to, but what I saw, there's potential there, and I think this kid could elevate this offense. Again, if he wins that quarterback spot, I think that they'll have a solid guy at that spot, and how much of an impact, that's going to be the biggest question. But I think he's a really solid football player. But let's talk about the strength. It's got to be on the offensive and defensive line, Mars. Corey Cothran Sager, senior offensive lineman, 5'11", 240 pounds. He's the anchor on the offensive line. He's going to have to be an important two-way player. A guy like Frankie Godino, again, 5'11", 225. We're not talking about wide guys. We're talking about some thickness, though. And then finally, Donovan Burns to round it all off. Offensive lineman, defensive lineman. The senior, this guy is more of the longer athlete, 6'1", 190 pounds. He's more of the athletic guy. Mm-hmm. But again, they're going to have to win up front. That's the strength of the team. With those running backs behind the experienced offensive line, I'm interested to see how they fill the rest of the offensive lineup, those two guys. But that's where the strength is of this team. And that, depending on the quarterback play, we're going to see, what happens at the quarterback spot. Hen Hud is going to be a tough out for teams. I think they have a tough football team. I think they bring back some solid football players, bring back a bunch of defensive players, which is going to help the defense, especially on the back end. It's not going to be easy to pass on them. Mm-hmm. But that mixture of bringing back some veteran D linemen and bringing back your secondary or two really solid corners, and then you have a linebacker in the middle. I think they have talent at each level. So this is going to be a tough out for the B teams playing Hen Hud.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at projected starters returning, 5 out of 11 offensively, 7 out of 11 defensively, and the big crucial one, like you said, was offensive line, 3 out of the 5 coming back. I mean, that's going to be their strength. Relying heavily on the offensive line, hopefully they can fill in the two spots with two key cogs that will at least generate stability within the front. And having that down pat will allow for the skill players like Ryan Travis to really break out. I mean, and not even just him. You have a bunch of other guys that will be pretty effective if the offensive linemen play well. And like you said, the X factor, the person you have to watch out for, is going to be Matt Zoller. I mean, the reality is, and we feel like we do X factors for every quarterback in this class, is because
there's a lot of new faces.
A lot of players that, quarterbacks are obviously crucial to any team. And if you have a guy that can play well, then that's going to only benefit your offense. And that's going to be the big question, is whether not only does the offense line, how do you fill the rest of them, but how well is the quarterback play? Yeah. And that's really going to be what guides Hen Hud going forward.
Absolutely. And finally, let's round it off with Putnam Valley Mars, coached by Ryan Alsacer. He's been there since 2016. And if I were to say, who is going to be the youngest team, I think Put Valley might be the youngest team this year. And I know in 2019 they went 2-6. They lost to Ardsley in the quarterfinals. A couple years ago, maybe they made that surprise run to the Class B to the championship. Where Putt Valley put together a couple wins in a row. But 2019, was their worst win total since 2010. Obviously trying to get things back on track. They look to be above 500 for the first time since 2013. Right, so this is going to be a young rebuilding program. Probably the youngest program of all the teams that we talked about this year, right? So offensively, they bring back, I think, projected 3 of the 11 starters. Got to replace the quarterback. Only one of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. Defensively, 3 of the 11 starters, right? So there's going to be I think this is going to be the young team of the class. And I didn't get to speak to Coach, but some guys to keep an eye on, and I'll start with the Frank's finest of this team, Ethan Mornier, defensive back and wide receiver. This kid, not a tall kid, but I think he's an underrated football player. I think he's an underrated defensive back, and I think his role is going to increase on the offensive side. He had 4 interceptions, and this kid lined up at corner, he lined up a little bit at safety. I like his versatility. I think he's just solid, and he's a willing run stopper, right? So I think this kid is a really solid defensive back, and I'm interested to see, he's going to be an important weapon on both sides of the ball. Another kid that I really liked, that's outside linebacker and running back, James Salvia, the senior. This kid 5'8", like 150 pounds, soaking wet, right? So, but tough kid. I mean, at the outside linebacker spot, he's not afraid. He comes off stunts. He's very active in the run game. I really like him. I think this kid is just a hard-nosed football player and an important cog on both. He's going to be out for both sides of the football. Defensively, no doubt. I think he's probably the most active defensive player in the run game coming back. So he's going to be an important two-way player. Another guy to keep in mind, an offensive lineman and linebacker, Jake Listwan. He's their leading tackler. Another tough, hard-nosed football player. 6 feet, 180 pounds, solid-sized kid. He was a leading tackler. He made a bunch of plays for them, especially in between the tackles. He's, again, offensive line is going to be big, right? They're looking to replace a bunch of starters. They need someone to take that anchor. And on the defensive side, again, bringing back your leading tackler is good. It's important, right? So, how big of a role he takes, how big of a leadership role and productivity role he takes is going to be huge for this team because there are going to be a lot of new faces around him. Finally, to keep in mind, one of the weapons that I'm interested to see is Cole Dersher, the junior, multi-sport athlete, plays basketball. I just think that they're going to need some young players to make some big strides, and this is a name to keep in mind on. I mentioned, I think this is going to be the youngest team. I think they can improve as the year goes along. It might be a little bit tough in the beginning, but the biggest question to me, quarterback, offensive line, and defensive line. I mean, that I just mentioned, like, things to be successful. Those are the biggest question marks for this team to resolve. It's not going to be easy. I know the coaching staff has a tough task in front of them, but I'm interested to see this team. I'm interested to see the growth and direction that this program goes. This is not an easy class. This is a tough, especially this year, tough class to be the youngest team with a shortened schedule, shortened practice time. This is going to be very intriguing, but I'm just excited to see what Putnam Valley does.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, being the youngest team in this class is very difficult, especially with COVID going on. Yeah. Makes it even harder. And this is a team that will definitely get better as the year progresses. But definitely what you need to do when you have a young team like this is rely on your seniors to kind of push or really be the major cog of the team, right? And obviously you're going to have them have a really large leadership role going forward. If I was the coach, I would say rely on guys like Ethan Moynier more than anybody else because he is definitely a top-tier talent that you have in your team. And on top of that, he's a senior presence, and it will probably guide the young guys going forward. And it's difficult. You have to fill in a lot of spots, especially on the front offensive line, defensive line, and you're replacing your quarterback. I mean, it's hard. But at the end of the day, I mean, you have to just implement the best scheme you have in a shortened season, and then you have the bodies. And one thing I always notice with Putt Valley is they have size. A lot of times they always have a size about them. It's really just about filling in the right roles and just getting a scheme forward, whether it's condensed because of the season or really just finding the best guys to fit the scheme that you're going to implement.
Yeah, and they're trying to improve their numbers. And, that's part of the rebuilding process, and they run that option offense. So you need a smart quarterback. You need a quick guy who can make quick decisions. It's going to be intriguing. But, Putt Valley, again, like you mentioned, nice size school. I'm interested to see, what direction they go in this year. That's going to be important. All right, Mars, that was our Class 1B team previews. Again, really look forward to seeing this competitive class play.
Yep.
And practice get kicked off in a couple weeks. Actually, 8 days, right? 8 days? 9 days?
Something like that.
Something like that, but it's close. It's right around the corner. And I want to thank everyone for tuning into our show. And, I appreciate all the support. But again, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, give us a like, share the video, give us feedback. We always look forward to feedback, ways we can improve our coverage of Section 1 sports, Section 1 football at this time. But again, thank you guys so much. And our final video will be on CD and the Independent League. So it's going to be a big one. It's going to be a doozy. So we got our one final video left, and then we'll get into in-season videos.
Yeah, there we go. We're getting to the showtime now.
Yes. So thank you guys all again, and we'll see you all very soon.